Hi there, this is Kove, and today we're in my Southeast London studio because the guys from Beatport have asked me to have a look at a tune of mine. So we're going to be having a look at a tune from my new EP called Ain't No Love, which is a slightly different tune for me. It's quite a dark, sort of jungly roller. So we're going to have a look at a few of the production elements and the mixing and the vocals and just generally how it was made. Because it was a fairly quick turnaround with the song. Really one of those where you just catch a vibe. So hopefully there'll be some interesting stuff in there. So we're going to pop over onto the computer now and have a look at that tune. So we are here now in the Logic project for Ain't No Love. So the best place to start is probably to play the track through, and then we know what we're dealing with.
There ain't no love here anymore. I keep on waiting for your anticipation. There ain't no love here anymore. I keep on waiting. I keep on waiting. I keep on waiting. I keep on waiting. There ain't no love here anymore. There ain't no love here anymore.
Yeah, so a cool little sort of jungly roller. I suppose the best place to start with this is how the track came about. So this started out all from the vocal sample, which isn't actually a sample. It's a friend of mine who came in here to do some ad-libs and ended up just coming up with this little phrase, which I sat on for ages and never ended up using until this track came along, and I worked out it sounded really cool in this context. So yeah, here's what I started out with.
There ain't no love here anymore.
So sounding quite radically different to where it ended up.
I keep on waiting.
So the most obvious
for
effect
your
there
anticipation.
is how it's been pitched down, and then I've added this plugin called the JJP vocals from Waves,
There ain't no love here anymore.
and the JJP especially just gives it a very sort of like instantaneous
Keep on waiting.
compression
For your
and
anticipation.
top end fizz and just sort of a nice amount of processing to really sit you in a vibe just where you need it. And I find myself using this plugin a lot because it's so instantaneous at making things sound good. Beyond that, we've just got the CLA again in default mode,
There ain't no love here anymore.
which is just adding a little bit more sparkle and sheen to it.
I keep on waiting.
And then we VQ'd it
For your anticipation.
just to get rid of some of those low ends,
There ain't
and
no love here
also
anymore.
this area around here we just dipped down as well.
I
Then we slammed it through the CLA 2A, and the disc is too slow. We slammed it through
There
here,
ain't no love here anymore.
and all that's doing is just giving it that sample feel
keep
and really
on
just squashing the
waiting.
hell out of it, which is what we want in this setting, and a bit of de-essing at the end just to clean it up. Which all in all has given us a really nice little sort of vocal sample to be working with. From there, the next stage of this track was finding how I'd back that, because I think in the original demo I had I just had it as piano rather than anything else, and what I ended up settling on was the Mellotron from Omnisphere. And for those that don't know what a Mellotron is, it was sort of the original sampler, and it was a box with a keyboard and a series of about 50 odd tapes which would loop, and they'd warp and over time, and they were sort of very rudimentary recordings of things like choirs and strings, which is where you end up with this sort of sound from. So yeah, as you can hear, it's sort of it doesn't sound really like an orchestra. It sounds, like I suppose a bad representation of an orchestra, but in this setting it really works. And especially if you think to sort of the late 60s and 70s where prog rock was coming through, a a lot of that, the sound was used on there, so it dates it nicely. So I can't show you much of that patch because I don't have Atmosphere on this computer, which is where this patch is coming through. But essentially all that is just that melody building up, and then with some strings backing it later on. Also in that, we have this bass line coming in here, which is a very warm, sort of low, greasy sound, which is coming out of this, which I find myself using an awful lot, which is the Monarch from Native Instruments, which is a super simple mono synthesizer, 2 oscillators. Can make some real fat bass lines in this, and it's all got that sort of mogy, analogy feel to it, which is perfect for this sort of thing. On that, I've given it a lot of this plugin, which is one of my favourite and most used plugins, which is a super simple one, by Joey Sturgis Tones, which is a sidewinder, and it's a stereo widening tool, and it's super effective at what it does, and there's no phase issues or anything like that. So if I take that off, we can hear it's very, very mono. Just giving it a nice bit of stereo width, but if we overdo it up here, you can see how wide that's getting, but we're not getting a lot of low end sort of flapping or anything like that. So big fan of that plugin. And then at the end, we've put it through the OTT, which is just to squash it, and really, make it sit in its own fatness, if you will. So from there, we then build up to this little area here, which is this melody that comes in. So as you can see, there's a lot of processing going on this melody. I'm not going to go through the whole thing on this, but essentially it's saw waves, and some sine waves even in massive, just with a load of distortion on them, and as you can see here, just a lot of reverb and a lot of compression just to squash it. And then what I've done here is I have doubled it with this sound, which is a very thin sounding piano just playing the notes in octaves, which I've just sample delayed to make it wide, and it's got a very, very strong transient on it, as you can probably see in the waveform, and that's just to give it a lot of hit. So I think for that's very simple sound, but together with the delay sort of morphing in the notes, it feels a little rough around the edges, which is something I really wanted for this tune. And then from there, we've got a few other little sort of hits and bits, like these orchestral timpani things and gongs, which again, just sort of ramping up that sort of feel of sort of slightly orchestral epicness that I wanted for this intro. And I've also got this stab as well, which is from an old song of mine. So then moving on from there, we've got this, which is this sort of switch up section, because we very much set a scene of sort of almost melodrama in the first section. But, we want to change that and go down a different avenue. So here we've got this little switch up section. So we're starting off with this little sub boom here. That's always very good at setting a scene there. And from there, we've got more effects building it up, and we've also got these little break effects in here where I've just sliced some breaks and distorted them and put a bit of tape delay on the end just to give an idea of the sound world we're going into. And then also at the end here, I've used a kick roll. Super easy, probably the most common thing in drum and bass. I'm just using EQ there to ramp it up, just to get rid of all the low end, because the less low end you have before a drop, the more you're going to feel it when it does come in on the drop. And also on top of that, we've got this little...
There ain't no love, there
which is the same vocal again, just super tape delayed and given a lot of room. So that brings us quite nicely on to the drop section here. Drop, which I'll just play through now. So the best place to start with that, I think, is probably the main drum bus. Let's play that. So a really breaksy sound, quite light on the drums, because we want a lot of the weight just to come from that sub and low end, rather than having a big 200 hertz snare banging in there. So we started off there, just with this think break. Very simple classic rhythm. We add an Amen in there, just to fill out that top end. I've dipped a lot of the mids out of this, just to give a lot of room for what else is going to be going on. And again, back to our trusty Sidewinder for a bit of stereo space. We've got a hat coming in there just to roll it along. And then we've added a snare here. Quite a punchy light snare. Some more shakers and shufflers. And then we've added this tops layer here. And last but not least, just a nice fat kick, just to fill out that lower end. And for me, that's a really nice sounding break. So within this, I think it's quite good to touch on this, which is this tops layer, which is a bounce from a very old song of mine called Iodine, which I've ended up using on pretty much every tune that has needed information in that range of the frequency spectrum. And it's super useful just to bounce out things like that and have them in there. And you know that they work and you know that they sound good, and you can just instantly drop in and we'll fill up that space. And anything, I'm of the opinion, anything to get a vibe going quicker the better, rather than messing about trying to find some new splashes or programming them in or doing whatever. Much rather do this and finish making the tune quicker. We've got some other layers here. So we've got this, which is the second snare, which is more of a transienty snare. And originally it's got that 200 hertz or 250 hertz punch. But we've taken that out just so we want that sort of top end transient of it. We've got something wider there. So that is again another snare, I think from again an old tune, which has been sample delayed for the width. And then just had a bit of drive put on it just to wind in the transient a bit. And so when it comes to that, things like overdrive and saturation are super useful ways of just taking a little bit of the harshness and the especially that top end transient out of things without compromising the volume. So all in all, we've got our main bus, and what we've done there as well is we've also got a fair amount, well, not a fair amount, some parallel compression through this drum bus, which is just smacking the hell out of these on the compressor and then being limited right at the end. And then if we take that out, we lose a lot of the flow in those drums. So a nifty little trick there. Moving on to the next most important part of this track, which is the bass. Very simple bass in this tune. So that's the main bass riff. And so the low end is coming from this, which is this Reese here. Very easy, very low, sort of very classic sound within D&B. And so this just made a massive And it's actually from an old sub-focus tutorial, which is where I came across it. But I've edited it slightly with some white noise and some distortion just to dirty it up a bit. And then what I've done is similar to what I did with the bass line earlier, is dip out this area, which is where you're getting a lot of that honk, which I think is a useful term for it. So I've just dipped that out again just to give it that sort of space. And what I've done with this as well is I've then copied that track and I've cut out the low end of it and used a ton of chorus and even got it to the stage where I've sampled a load of it, which is pretty rare to do for a bass line, but there's so little information in the low frequencies, I'm not worried about there being issues within the stereo field. And anything stereo, the wider it is, the louder it's going to be because it's perceived loudness. So with this, you've now got a super wide, super thick bass line. And just at the end of this, I've got another very easy bass sound, one oscillator with a pitch envelope and some distortion, just giving it sort of a bit of just a sort of thumpy, nice, almost 909-y sounding kick. Moving on from the bass, we've got these few other little incidental sounds, which I suppose you could categorize as bass, which again, coming out of Massive. So it's sort of pretty horrible, weird little sound, which is just it's just a resonant, low-passed square wave that's horribly distorted, which I've just boosted the frequencies that I want out of it and cut other ones I don't, bounced out as an audio file and stuck it in the tune. And it's just given it a nice little incidental stop. So anything for this section that I wanted to get away from sort of anything too pretty like it was in the first half of this track. And so all in all, we've got a nice little sort of rolling bass section, which when we combine with our breaks, already got a really nice feel to it. I know that will sound good in a club, and yeah, dark and dingy. I like it. And just all while that's going on, the vocal is coming back in with similar sort of processing as before, just with a lot less in the lower part around here, just so it's not getting muddied up with anything on the bass side of things. I wanted to sort of step back a bit. And that's just got a load of delay on it, filling up those spaces. So moving on from there, we have these sort of interesting parts here, which are these little break switch up areas. So those, very easy to make, a lot of fun to make. They're just essentially cut up breaks, just super distorted. And super pitched up. So again, that's the think break, just put up. And then just another break having on the end, just for another switch up sort of feel to it. So anything that I could do that was sort of like felt a bit jungly on this, I wanted to do. And also what I've used on this is this plugin called the Stereo Spread, which is built in Logic, which essentially is just a plugin which splits different frequencies left and right according to where you set it. And in this default, it's quite aggressive, and it really helps stuff just stick out in quite a, not a horrible manner, but quite a distinct manner, which worked really well. So if I play with, and then without, so everything's much more centered, and there's not so much odd stereo stuff going on. And the last part of that is this little Amen roll here, which is just the snare from an Amen break cut up very, very small and stretched out, and then with the fade in, and you've got instant jungle. And I've also done another one a little bit further on down the track here, which is this one here. Again, similar sort of thing, just with that stereo spread. If I turn that off, dead center. If I turn it on, we've got stuff sounding a little off in the stereo field. With our instant jungle snare again. So, and then we're moving on to the last 16 of this drop section here, which is where some other little incidental sounds come in. Which is just really easy little noises, just to keep on mixing up a bit. Especially when you've got a track that's as sparse as this, it's good to have stuff that does add a bit of interest, almost to cheat your way to the breakdown. So in those ones here, we've got just a little vocal thing there, and some rave stabs. Sort of a hoovery sound, and then our little rewind request MC at the end here, which I've just distorted and then run it through the pedal board with the spring reverb, which is a really good way of making something sound, super old school, is by using these things like spring reverbs and guitar effects on it, just because it gives it a real lot of grit and dirt and bite. We've rounded that off with another one of our little switch up breaks, and the vocal just coming in reverse. And then I've done something slightly unorthodox for a drum bass tune here, which is I've got a 4-bar breakdown before the second half of the tune comes in. I'd never normally do this just purely for mixing purposes. It's just a bit of a pain. Whereas with this, I really felt like it needed something to just change it up a bit and make sure that we were going back from section B back to section A again. So yeah, it's just nice to have a break, and you don't always have to adhere by the strict rules of bars all the time. So we've also got some other little sort of analogy effects in here, which I can't remember where they came from, but they're in a library somewhere. It's just again adding a little bit of this, which actually I'll touch on going back to the intro, is having this layer here, which is my crackle layer. Which is something I do on a lot of tunes, which is just to add something like tape noise or vinyl noise or tape hiss or something, just because it gives it it takes it out of that digital world. Although you're faking it, it does help to get you out of there, especially when you combine it with our Mellotron instruments and everything else we've got going on in the intro, just to make it sound a little rougher. Now we're at the end of the tune. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on the master out, because it looks like there's a lot of plugins on there, but they're not actually doing a whole amount. This is the Isotope Ozone stereo imager, which I love using, and is a really good tool for a huge amount of jobs. If I play it with, and I take it out, we've lost a lot of that top end width, and although it's very subtle and from a specific frequency range around here, it is helping to just widen things out and give it a little top end sparkle. It's also very good. I didn't need to use it a lot for this track, but keeping your low end in check, and just making sure that that's all summing to mono. And there we've just got a little low cut, because this tune's written in C, which is a very low key for DMB. So we just want to make sure there's no sort of rogue frequencies muddying anything up. And when it comes to that, this tune is written in C. When you think your sort of standard drum bass keys being like F and C, F and G, although we're in C, we have still a lot of relative notes in those other keys. So, for instance, the note C in this tune isn't actually hit an awful lot. When the drop hits, we're starting on an F, so we're still getting that really big impact note. So, as long as there are some key notes within your bass line that are within the range that will hit really hard in the club, you're pretty much safe to get away with writing in any key, rather than limiting yourself to thinking, oh, I just must write in F, I must write in G, because there is a whole scope of other keys and other musical elements to explore. So back onto the master chain here. We've then just got the API compressor, just giving us a couple of dB of gain reduction, nothing too extreme. Yeah, just to give it a nice gluing together before it hits the limiter. So that has been my walkthrough of my tune, Ain't No Love. I hope there's some useful information in there and some new techniques and little insights into how I do my work. Yeah, thanks for checking me out, and I'll see you soon.